The comments heard on The View From A Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
Thank you, lovely Emily. This is Mac. It is the 22nd day of May in the Lord's year 2023. I'm Mac McCoy, and you're listening to the daily radio program ministry, and it's called The View From A Pew. And where this comes is if you were sitting in church and your pastor was giving some type of service or message or sermon or whatever you want to call it, and you just had to ask a question. So you'd stand up in the middle of the church service and say, Pastor, can I ask a question? That's kind of what we do here. And so thank you for watching and listening to this. If you're listening to it, it's on the radio. And if you're watching it, you're probably on social media, Facebook, YouTube, things like that. And we're very transparent here. I don't do any editing. So I probably should have told you that, Joe. We just don't do any editing, you know. If we say something that isn't right, we'll just back up and correct it and move on. Sure. So, all right, I want talk right into that mic for me, sir. I want you to meet my guest today, and there's an interesting story on how I found him. Your name is Joe Herring.
Exactly, like the fish.
Like the fish. So spell that, because you also do like a blog or some things like that?
I have my own website, dailyherring.com. It's Herring.
Okay.
I do a show on Mondays on KFAB in the afternoons, 2 to 6, and that's where our particular subject today is coming from.
Yeah, I'm a KFAB fan. Always been a news fan. Lived here in Omaha years and years. And even when I moved to Iowa, I would, when the internet allowed me to do, I'd listen to KFAB. And Ian Swanson left to go work for the senator. And so they're having different people do that show. And I just want to tell people, and I know I've told you this, but man, you did a good job on this show. That was a week ago, 2 weeks ago today. Yeah. And I was just so impressed by the writing and the presentation. And I called Scott over at KFAB and said, can you give me the contact information? I'd like to have him on my show. And Scott's a class act, and he did that. So we're there today. So tell our listeners and viewers what this topic is about from your words.
Transgenderism in specific, but left-wing overbearing overreach in general.
Okay.
The transgender issue right now, transgender ideology, the dealing with gender dysphoria, the what in essence is proselytizing in the schools, this is all part of a much larger mindset on the left. And it follows a pattern that is tried and true. Once you recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it, because you'll see it again and again and again with every issue. It's been said with Marxists, the issue is never really the issue. What they're talking about, what they're screaming about at that moment, isn't necessarily really what they're talking about. It's just a point of contention that they can use to dig in deeper for the real issue, which is power and control.
Very well said. Now, you can find, again, Joe's daily blog at herring.com.
Daily
Herring.
Dailyherring.com.
And would encourage you to reach out to him there and give him any comments, positive or negative. You know, you can do whatever you feel is good, but we sure appreciate you taking the time to come on today, Joe, and talking with us. All right, so little bit of your background. You're a man of faith, and we will talk a little bit about that today if we can, but I'm really not coming from a religious standpoint on this, okay? I don't think that transgenderism has anything to do with faith.
Right.
Yeah. I think it has to. Well, what does it have to do with? I'll ask you. You're the expert.
Well, Transgenderism is, at heart, a mental disorder. We know what it is. It's gender dysphoria. It's people who misunderstand how they're supposed to be in relation to nature, in relation to how they were made. Now, it's not just gender that can exhibit this. It's also body dysmorphia. That's anorexia, for example. Anorexics see themselves in a way that is not compatible with reality. They continuously see themselves as fat when in reality they are dangerously thin. Yet when we deal with an anorexic from the medical standpoint, we don't look at them and say, "Oh, you're right, you're a pig. You just absolutely have to stay away from additional food." We don't affirm that problem. That's the same thing with transgenderism. Gender dysphoria is the same as any other dysmorphia as far as understanding how you're supposed to be. When you're disconnected from reality, it's not the compassionate thing to do to push you further down that rabbit hole. The compassionate thing to do is what we had done for centuries up until now, and that is treat the illness, deal with the problem, deal with the disconnect from reality. And what prompted my comments on my show that day was, of course, we have LB 574 going through in Lincoln. The outsized outrage, the complete recasting of all intentions from both sides has really served to do nothing more than muddle up what is really a very simple problem. And that is, we can't continue to pretend if we're going to reach any kind of a decent outcome. You can't base decisions on fantasy. If you do, your decisions will always be wrong.
Yeah. So people know exactly where to find you, spell your last name for me again.
Herring.
Okay, you said just like the fish.
Joe
I should have
Herring.
heard that.
Yep.
Herring.
Correct.
All right, and that's .com.
Dailyherring.com.
Yep, Joe Herring from. Okay. All right. The Daily or Daily?
Just Daily.
Daily. All right. Whoops! Knocked your microphone over here. So what made you what prompted you to do this topic on KFAB that day?
Well, going back throughout my career, I've always been fortunate to be freelance.
Okay.
Which obviously gives me the ability to write about what I'm passionate about, because in reality, I am a writer. That's what I do more than anything else. I also broadcast, but that came after the writing. I can't stand when people lie to me, and I hate it even more when they lie to everyone else and expect me to go along with it. And in reality, that's what we're seeing through this entire transgender, gender identity, gender ideology issue, is we're being dragged down into the weeds in order to keep us from recognizing what's really happening. And what's really happening is power and control. It's a fight over our kids.
Oh, man.
Who gets to determine how they're raised. And what prompted this particular, I guess you could call it a rant, was I was discussing on the show at that point, I'd been discussing how media tends to misreport things. Sometimes it's unintentional because the reporter just doesn't have the background to understand what he's reporting on. For example, a science reporter that just doesn't know science.
Then they shouldn't be reporting on science.
Exactly.
That's another topic.
They assign them all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
The other the other thing are those who know full well what they're doing, and they're pushing a narrative. They're building a narrative. That's a problem in the media. And when you're building a narrative, by necessity, you have to exclude any counter narratives. And I was going off at that point on a whole list of different subjects and topics that had been misreported in the media. And that was when I essentially called out those on the left, the people on the left who are honest, intellectually honest, who recognize and understand that there is something called truth, and it's not malleable based on what you identify as that morning.
Yeah, you're listening to Joe Herring, by the way, and it's just dailyherring.com. And I think it's interesting you use the word rant, because this is your tone on the radio, which I really like. I've never heard you yell on the radio or even probably talk louder than you are now. So your rant is actually coming from the way you feel about what you're saying.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
The subjects I talk about on the radio are the same as the ones I write about. It's whatever I'm passionate about. It's whatever issue has stirred me to action. And, if you're just like you can't write with passion on a subject you really don't care about, you can't broadcast or do a show on a subject you don't care about either. And that's why I'm very thankful to Scott Voorhees, the program director,
great guy,
because he gives me the freedom to do that.
Yeah,
he just says, here's the microphone, here's KFAB Nation, have at it. And I've never been censored. They've never come to me and said, no, stay away from that topic, go there. And that's the way I live, I live with truth.
Yeah, that's a Gary thing, that's a Rosie thing. That is the way KFAB has been long ago. I mean, I remember KFAB as, who was the sports announcer there forever and ever?
Lyle Bremser.
Lyle Bremser. I mean, I grew up in
Beatrice. Back to the days of Walt Kavanaugh.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I grew up in Beatrice, and so KFAB was just, I mean, they were the news station,
Exactly.
when it came to radio. And I still remember Lyle Bremser making that call on Johnny the Jet when he hit that touchdown. And anyway, it's a great radio station. I don't think people, and I hope it's okay for me to say this, but I don't think people really realize how good of a radio station that is from an integrity standpoint.
Well, everyone is going to find something to complain about. No matter what your political stripe, whatever your ideologies may be, your religious beliefs, no one is ever going to fill them all perfectly. But you can respect people who are trying.
Yeah, and that's what we're doing today. All right. That's Monday's show. We're coming back here in 23 and a half hours, and we're going to continue this conversation all week long. And we'd love to have your input. You can give us an email, mac@theviewfromapew.com. I want to thank Divine Truth for being our sponsor today.
Divine Truth Christian Store, where you'll find more.
The comments heard on The View From A Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
Thank you, Emily, for that introduction. I appreciate you very, very much, young lady. I'm Mac McCoy. It's Tuesday the 23rd in the Lord's year of 2023, and we are live on the radio, and we are also live on the internet, because nobody can live without social media anymore, right? We're live on Facebook, and we're also, this is being recorded both visually and auditorily. And you can, as Emily just said, you can go to YouTube and just search for The View From A Pew. My guest today, and my guest all week long, is a gentleman by the name of Joe Herring. And he writes, and you can find that writing at dailyherring.com. He is a man of faith, but talks about all kinds of other things. And 2 weeks ago, he was on 1110 KFAB and did this program, of the content of this program that we're talking about today, and it was just a great radio program. And so I asked him to come on, and he agreed to. And basically, after we talked about it a little bit yesterday, yes, this is about the topic of transgenderism, but if I get it right from you, it's also about how the left is well, they think we have stupid written on our forehead.
And they count on it.
Yeah, that's right. They count on it.
They insist on it.
And if you disagree with them, and it wasn't this way when I was a journalist full time back in the day. Walter Cronkite was my mentor, and you had to have 2 to 3 sources that would confirm and go public that they knew this information, and then you could print it or put it on the radio or whatever. Today, and I know they're just doing what they need to do, but anchors are nothing more than Oprah Winfrey. Mm-hmm. You know, there's no more biased news going on. Everybody knows if you go to this channel, you're going to hear the left. If you go to this channel, you're going to hear the right. And it shouldn't be that way. We should be able to trust everybody with the facts. Joe, what was his name in the detective show? Just the facts, ma'am.
Friday.
Joe Friday, just the facts. Yeah. All right, so years and years ago when I was going to college in the University of Nebraska, I dated a young lady, and her stepfather was a, now I can't think of it, dressed up like a woman.
Oh, cross-dressing, transvestite.
Transvestite,
I
okay.
think that's what they used to call it then. I don't know if we're supposed to use that now. Who cares?
Well, why not? Well, what's the difference here? Now I'm ranting. But you're right. I wish they'd quit changing names and words to try to make it sound better. What was the one I heard yesterday? Somebody down on the unicameral said something about it's about children's health.
Exactly.
This bill that they're trying to make it illegal for anyone under the age of 18 or whatever to have gender-changing surgery or whatever they call it.
Right. There's a specific purpose behind changing the meaning of words amongst the left, and it's something that it's not an accident. If you continually change the lexicon, then you force
the what?
The lexicon, the frame of reference, the vocabulary around it.
You got to talk to me like I'm an 8-year-old. I'm not that smart.
If you're always changing the vocabulary about the issue you're discussing, you're forcing your opponent to follow along with that, to adopt that new language,
yes,
to adopt and frame their arguments based on what they're hearing on the other side. It's a subtle way of controlling debate, and they do a very good job of that. That's something we don't do as well,
because they end up criticizing us for using the wrong words, mm-hmm, and they're not the wrong words. They're the exact words you were using a month ago or a year ago. Exactly. I think about the term climate change. Now, it just drives me crazy, because all I believe is that they're trying to find a way to tax us on our carbon footprint. Exactly. But when it started out, it was global warming.
Right. And
then they figured out, it's not all warming. It's just changing of the weather. And when I talk to some of these people, I say, God's in charge of that, right? People aren't making a darn bit of difference on this earth. God will do what God's going to do, and I know you know that. Sure. Why can't we call it transvestites anymore? Because they changed the language?
Yeah, in essence. Because whenever a word gets a pejorative meaning attached to it, whenever they feel that, now this word doesn't make us look as good as we want to look, they change it. They change the word. And if you have a word or a phrase that truly, honestly, and openly discusses what they're doing in lay terms, that has to go away, which is why you get children's health put in place of mutilation and
Yeah.
gender, the chopping off of genitalia.
Wow.
That's not health by any normal definition, but from a political standpoint, that works perfectly.
Man. Yeah. What was the term? What's the term they're using now? I mentioned it yesterday, but something about children's health. They've somehow tied in health to it.
Oh yeah, well everything they want to do is health if it can be remotely attached to a medical procedure. And that would include abortion.
Yeah.
Abortion is women's health, it's reproductive rights. Well, no, it's not, because reproductive rights would involve reproduction. Abortion is the opposite.
Yeah.
It eliminates reproduction. But it sounds very good, doesn't it? It makes for a great catchphrase. It works in the media.
Okay, so I don't want to sound pompous because I don't feel like I'm pompous, but do they really think most of us on this side of the fence don't understand what they're doing, or do most people on this side of the fence not understand what they're doing?
It depends on the listener. There are some listeners, for example, people who would be listening to this show or the listeners that I speak to on KFAB, they are engaged.
Yes.
They're well read, they understand the issues, they want to know more. They're not confused by this. They're not misled. However, there is a very large segment of the population that gets their news from basic sources, and they never dig any deeper. There's a reason why headlines and the first paragraph is so important, because whatever you put in that, for about anywhere from 40 to 60% of the people never read any further. So if you have a story that blows your narrative out of the water, if you put a lying headline and a misleading lead in the first paragraph, even if it is diametrically opposed to what actually happened, that's going to be what you're going to leave in the minds of a large number of readers or listeners.
Joe Herring is my guest today, and his website is Daily Herring, just like the fish, HERRING.com. When I was in college, I had the opportunity to work for KFOR, Stewart Broadcasting. Sure. And I was in a meeting one day, and quite frankly, it was way above my pay grade, but I was in there, and somebody made the comment, well, if it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
And the gentleman that was running the radio station at that time was infuriated that a journalist would lower the value of news to, well, if it bleeds, it leads.
It was the beginning of chasing clicks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, selling at heart, radio, media is all a business. So you do have to be able to appeal. You have to have something people want to pay for in order to get access to. Now, that has been manipulated to the point of absurdity now, to where not only are they chasing clicks, they're willing to lie, mislead, whatever it takes to do that.
When you say chasing clicks, you mean somebody going to a website and clicking on something.
Exactly, on the internet, where right now, if you were to let's say you had a show and you wanted to market it to the world, your only way of showing the marketability of it would be the number of people who visit your website.
Yeah.
The number of people who engage that way. And that's become shorthand for successful or not.
Yeah, and I'm old school, and I'm probably not the smartest guy in the room, but I don't do that. You know, I come from the time that if your radio station did a good job, then people would want to advertise on it.
Right.
And if you did a great job, a lot of people would advertise, and you would be business-wise, you'd be successful.
Correct.
But it blows me away sometimes when people do what they do simply for the ratings.
Well, you have people who are solely money motivated.
Yeah.
It's in this business there are the people who sit in the chairs like we do, and then there are the suits.
Yeah.
The suits, unfortunately,
Yeah.
having never run a show of their own, don't really understand the meaning behind being accurate.
Well, and I'm not against them making money, obviously. I've been in radio a long, long time, owned my own stations, and we had to make money. But we made money because our product was excellent.
Right.
We didn't make money because somebody clicked through. Now, the old days, we really didn't know how many people listened to the radio.
Right.
We still don't today because it's analog in many ways. With the internet, of course, we know exactly how many people clicked on. I can tell you when we get done today's show how many people were listening to it and watching it. And yes, that can translate to dollars. But that ought to be the benefit of doing a good job, not the reason we're doing a good job.
Exactly. And that's the way I approach my writing, and it's the way I approach my broadcasting.
All right. Now, when we come back tomorrow, I've got you on every day. And by the way, thank you very much for that.
Sure.
I want you to take the script that you wrote all about this, because there are a lot of people that use scripts. And quite frankly, I admire you for doing that. If I type up something like that, I don't sound like I'm I'm just sound like I'm reading. But I want you to read some of this because you did research. And that's something else nobody does. I can remember when I'd go into the police department at 3:30 in the morning to look at all what had happened the night before. Then I'd go into work, I'd write up the news stories, and then I'd present them on the air. Now I can show up 20 minutes early and go to the Google.
Exactly.
And obviously you probably use the computer and stuff like that to write this, but this is very well written, and I would like you to take the time to read some of the real important stuff, if you would.
Sure, will do.
I'm Mac McCoy, and I thank you for listening. We're here every day at this time. Same bat station, same bat time. And you can also find us at The View From A Pew on Facebook, or you can also go to YouTube and search The View From A Pew. And we thank Divine Truth for sponsoring us.
Where you'll find more.
Now, remember, the main reason that Jesus came is to forgive us. And I hope that is a central part of your faith, is understanding. And God made no mincemeat out of this when he said, you know what, cowboy, I'm going to forgive you the way you forgive others. And God doesn't kid around. So if you're holding a resentment to somebody, if there's somebody you just live rent-free in your head and you keep pouring that stuff in and you think it hurts them, it doesn't. So forgive yourself. Forgive others, and remember, that's why Jesus died. We'll be back in 23 and a half hours, and if I'm not here, find Jesus, because I'll be with him.
The comments heard on The View From A Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
Thank you, Emily Mac McCoy, here on this Wednesday, the 24th. Wow, May is just flying by. We thank you for listening today or listening on the internet. You can get it any way you can. As Emily said, you can go to YouTube and just search The View From A Pew. The View From A Pew. I should know the name of the show. And my guest today is Joe Herring, and he writes is it a daily blog?
Well, I
Tried.
woefully neglect it at times because I do write for a lot of other national publications as well. So, I try and get on at least something at least a week.
You like writing, don't you?
Yeah, I do.
You're also a talented individual because you can translate that in words. And a lot of writers can't do it auditorily, and a lot of people who do it auditorily, and I'm one of them, can't write it down. So I really respect what you do, and I thank you for coming on today.
Well, thank you.
A couple weeks ago, Joe was on KFAB and filling in for that afternoon spot that they're looking for somebody to fill. And I'll tell Scott, I think it ought to be you. But Joe did a show on transgenderism, and it was a different show than I'd ever heard before. It wasn't slamming the gays or making fun of this or making fun of that. It was really the basis of what transgenderism is. And I love what you say. It's a mental illness.
It is.
So I want you to just to talk about it for a while from the script that you wrote, and you can read it if you want to. I just want the people to hear your thoughts on some of this.
Well, when you say script, it was actually, this is a transcript of what I said. What I said was largely off the cuff.
Oh, good.
That show.
You did great.
So this obviously, when I do a broadcast, I have some notes of points that I want to make sure I don't forget to bring up.
Yeah.
But this was based on seeing, again, for the umpteenth time, people manipulating the emotions, the needs of other vulnerable people in order to further a political position. And I was very upset about that. The subject came up in the context of LB 574 and the people who are vociferously against it, the way they're discussing this as if it were the way they're assigning motives to our side that aren't even remotely accurate.
We're homophobic, or we're racist, or
that we would be just as happy to see all of those people dead as anything else.
It's just not
and
true.
It's not. And
I don't think I've ever met anybody that says that.
No. And if I did, I wouldn't have met them twice.
Yeah, very good. No, I agree. I wouldn't hang around with them.
Well, I'll be happy to read through this for you so that you can kind of get a flavor of what that broadcast was that day. I had been discussing the crafting of narratives in the media, the way the media misreports a story in order to push an agenda. And I really hate that, being in the media, because I pride myself on not pushing the agenda, but finding the truth.
I agree.
And I started out by explaining that narrative building is indisputable. It doesn't happen occasionally or even just frequently. It happens every single time. I would ask my fevered left-wing listeners to consider this. Is it acceptable to you to have reality itself misrepresented to push a political or social narrative? When everything is slanted, warped, and skewed to force only one viewpoint, and one that is in direct opposition to actual demonstrable reality, how then do you reconcile that with your supposed devotion to tolerance, lived experience, and all the other buzzwords that you concoct to make yourself feel as if you aren't simply Stalinists, albeit too cowardly to state it openly? But let's look to our experts.
Bravo.
Well, let's look to our experts to save us, right? If a subject involves a physician, then by golly, let's bow and scrape before the first white lab coat we can find and begin a knee-jerk goose step on their order. But doctors aren't immune to being greedy, self-interested bastards. Pardon my French. Indeed, history gives us many great examples of just that. People lying about what is to further an agenda that just so happens to line their pockets. Well, what do you know? Doctors happen to be humans too, and they have all the failings the rest of us possess. We know this dynamic intimately from the pandemic, and of course, gender-affirming care. I hate even using that phrase. It is such a total lie. Amid your incessant lying, you still find the temerity to express surprise and indignation when the rest of us, who live our lives properly, tethered to reality, reject your fantasies and disgusting, clingy demands for our approval. Yes, I'm speaking directly to you, the transgendered, gender dysphoric, non-binary whatevers out there. You need to hear this. Let's be clear, you're acting out for attention. You know you are inadequately prepared to deal with life as it is. So you permit your disordered brains to calculate some new existence where you get to be the king or the queen or whatever a non-binary, pup-handling, cross-dressing, transvestite, drag-worshipping ruler would be called in your fantasy world. However, living that life isn't enough for you. Just like all mentally adrift people, you unconsciously seek the approval of those you cannot match. You want to be seen by them, recognized as equally competent in life, when clearly you aren't. You're suffering from a mental disorder. And while treatment might help you actually achieve some level of day-to-day competence, you're repulsed by the idea because that would make you like every other Chad and Stacy. And you've convinced yourself that such an existence would be a terrible thing, when deep down, and you know it, you wouldn't be the sick, degraded version of yourself that you are now had you been able to meet the standards of a Chad or Stacy in the first place. So those of us with true compassion, with legitimate empathy for your tragic condition, unwisely acceded to your demands and offered you an unmolested existence, free to behave in whatever ridiculous fashion you chose, but with only one condition: that you keep your unstable hands to yourself. We, ordinary, achieving adults, offered you a form of détente and an accommodation that matched your original desire, and then, like the proverbial camel with its nose under the tent, you changed the rules. No longer was acceptance enough for you. Tolerance no longer gave you the high you so addictively needed. Suddenly free to live your ridiculous out in the open, you discovered you were still deliriously unhappy. You realized, perhaps even more than before all this acceptance and social glory came your way, that your existence, your chosen way of life, was a joke. It didn't satisfy. In fact, it was actually corrosive to you personally and to all those unfortunate enough to be dragged into your orbit.
You're listening to Joe Herring, and he was on KFAB a couple weeks ago, filling in the afternoon, and this is the show he did. So I want to give Scott Voorhees and all the folks over at KFAB the credit for this, for having that on the show. Scott gave me right over to you, and so it was great, and I thank you very much for being here. And he's reading the transcript.
Correct.
And it's really important to understand that this is what he said. It was recorded and then it got printed. It's kind of artificial intelligence a long time ago.
Right.
So that's what you're listening for. And if you want to make a comment to him, you can get a hold of him at dailyherring.com. And he is an Omahan, served in the military for a while. Thank you for serving. And just kind of, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but just kind of got sick and tired of hearing people whine about not getting their way the way they wanted it. So then they changed the rules.
Well, and that's transgenderism in this gender ideology movement is just a symptom of a much larger problem,
Which is
leftism changing the goalposts, moving the goalposts, changing the vocabulary, forcing us down into the weeds where only they have been playing. So we walk in without any basic knowledge, trying to understand a world that they've crafted in their own heads and only they understand.
Yeah,
So
they make it up.
exactly.
Yeah.
And then once we do understand it and begin to beat them at their own game, they change the rules again. You see, that's what this was all about. It's never enough to achieve the issue.
Yeah, and Joe said something very important here. This is not about transgenderism as much as it's about truth. This is not about children under 18 having surgeries to change their gender, but it's really more about the truth. We're being lied to all the time, and we've got to stop being lied to. And what happens is when we call them on it, now we're a horrible person. We're a racist or a homophobic, and that's just not the case. And I love how you talk about tolerance in here, because the left has no tolerance.
Well, they demand it, they will not give it.
Right.
Because tolerance assumes truth. If you tolerate something, you're giving it a tacit stamp of approval. Silence is acquiescence. Acquiescence is approval. And we unwisely gave them that pseudo approval when we were just sick and tired of listening to them whine. We said, all right, fine. If you want to go, dance wearing grotesquely made up faces, that's fine. But you see, that wasn't enough because they needed to go further. They needed to get more.
You know, my mother's little brother was gay, and this is back in the 50s and 60s. And he was one of the first people that I knew that got AIDS. This was when AIDS was, does Rock Hudson have it? And Magic, and oh, it's a yucky thing. And I remember back then my mother, who's a very conservative woman, was lobbying her city councilman, her state representative, because she just wanted to go visit him in the hospital. And she also wanted to let Uncle Bill's partner come visit him. And that was where we started with all this. Can we just visit each other in the hospital when we're sick? And now look at where it's at. In our lifetime, it's gone to this.
Oh, yeah.
That's incredible.
Well, you have very reasonable demands. And reasonable demands are accept me. Don't hate me.
Right.
Okay. We don't hate you.
We don't hate you.
Okay. And
we hate what you do, though.
Yeah. Well, see,
and I don't mean the sexual thing. I mean the way you treat us.
the idea behind acceptance is you're going to live your life your way, and I'm not going to interfere. Problem is, when you start interfering with our lives in order to live yours, now we've got an issue. We got
a challenge. All right, Joe Herring, he'll be back tomorrow at this very time. You may be listening or watching this online. Thank you for doing so. It's The View From A Pew, and that's .com, and it is also the search phrase on YouTube to be able to pass this show on and let other people hear it.
Where you'll find more.
We do want to remind you that this ministry, The View From A Pew, is really just about one thing. My passion is, and what Jesus has led me to do, is to help people learn to forgive. Because if we could just forgive people, there would be so much less spite and hate and venom. And God tells us in the Lord's Prayer, hey, I'm going to forgive you the way you forgive others. And yet there are still people out there that will say, I'll never forget that person. Well, then you shall never be forgiven. And you taunt Jesus who hung on the cross so you could have that forgiveness.
The comments heard on The View From A Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
Thank you very much. Mac McCoy here on a Thursday, the 25th, 22nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th of May, and we thank you for taking the time to listen. If you're watching this on YouTube or on Facebook, the dates and times may be different. I would encourage you to go to YouTube and find this on The View From A Pew and forward it. Put it on your Facebook. Put it on your Instagram. Put it on your TikTok. What my guest is talking about today is simply kindness. It's not hate. We're not against anybody. We just want to be treated on the right the way you want to be treated on the left. It kind of goes back to that forgiveness thing. You know, treat people the way you want to be treated, and the whole world would be a happier place. So if you loan this to somebody or let them listen and they think we're bashing something, the only thing we're bashing is dishonesty. And wherever that comes from, it shouldn't come from the media. But as a member of the media, I understand where we've gone, the difficult road we've gone down in telling people what you want them to hear rather than what the truth is. Joe, you're talking about some of this, and you did a very good job, and you're reading from the transcript. So I want you to start where you left off yesterday and continue to help our audience understand the truth.
Well, the entire purpose behind this this rant, if you will, was to explain that there is a difference between those who genuinely believe what they believe and the fact that they're being manipulated by those who want to exploit that illness for their own gain. And as a consequence, it's placed us, decent people on both sides, at odds with each other. We're being pushed to fight by another group who knows that what they're doing is wrong, but they're doing it because it serves their purpose.
Yeah, and it's driving the checkbook.
Exactly.
Well, go ahead.
Well, where I left off at the last episode was we were talking about how even after acceptance was given, even after it was fine for you to walk down the street wearing whatever you wanted to wear, and no one was coming after you, you weren't being dragged into an alley and beaten, you discovered, you, the transgendered individual, the gender dysphoric, realized that wasn't enough. You were still unhappy. Like a whirlpool, you dragged everything in your reach under the water and you killed it. Like an addict, you soon discovered that you needed higher and higher doses to maintain. Tolerance alone was an insult. What you wanted, not what you deserved, was outright acceptance. But wait, that wouldn't be enough either, would it? Celebration of your illness was your Gaia-given right. Accepting you was no longer enough. We had to elevate you above all the rest of us as the most enlightened, the highest achieving, the penultimate expression of humanity. You were a person worthy of emulation. No, wait, not just emulation. You had earned the right to proselytize. All the world is yours, and the rest of us Luddite Neanderthals better get used to it. You held your parades, you spread your sickness, you behaved in disgusting and pornographic fashion in every venue possible, even in front of children, especially in front of children. And why wouldn't you? You'd convinced yourself that you alone had the key to life. Only you really understood what the human being was meant to be, and by golly, you weren't going to let the ordinary people ruin the next generation by infecting them with reality. No, you would save the children from reality. You would release them from the burden of sanity and get them to join you on your odyssey of malformation. And hey, if a few of those kids happen to fall apart in the process, even if a great majority of them fail to thrive in your imposed truth, well, them's the breaks, right? You can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. But you see, then a few of us normal folks had enough. Once alerted to the malevolence of your efforts, the twisted horrors you intend to inflict on our innocent children, we pushed back. And oh, the howling that ensued. You moaned, complained, and screamed. You accused, insulted, and maligned. And when that didn't cause good men and women to quail in fear of your grotesquely made-up faces, you got violent. You began riots you called protests. You initiated harassment campaigns against family whose only crime was opposing your attempted dictatorship. You decided doxing was a wonderful tool by which you could release the most disordered and unstable among you against your enemies. And hey, it's not like you actually set their house on fire, right? It's not like you personally gathered in feral packs and beat them ferociously. No, you simply put an address on a website. You simply, innocently suggested a peaceful demonstration against people who your rhetoric had already othered in precisely the same way you insist we othered you. Except we didn't other you. You set yourselves apart. Then began the progression from live and let live to live my way or don't live at all. We've had enough.
I want to stop for just a second there. Read that again, that last line, because that is the key to everything we're talking about.
And is where we are today. We didn't other you. You set yourselves apart and then began the progression from live and let live, which was where we once were, to live my way or don't live at all.
Now, just listen to that for a minute. I don't care where you stand on these political issues of transgender and LGBTQ, and those people are to be loved like Jesus taught us to love them. But Jesus did not teach us in any way, shape, or form that we should, and how did you say it, malign other people. They're howling, the moaning, the complaining, the screaming. You're not going to get what you want by acting that way.
They've gone, because that didn't deliver what they thought it would. Now they went to threatening.
Yeah.
And now they're if you saw any of the debate that's been happening down there, the protests down in Lincoln regarding the LB 574, you'll see it's a threat. It is a open threat of violence against anyone who does not kowtow to what they're after.
Well, and I even heard, and I could be incorrect on this, I'm wrong a lot, but I even heard that a couple of the latest shootings, meaning going back a couple months, were done by people who were transvestites or transgendered. They were, this is the protesting you speak of, but yet they were killing people.
And it's not just one or two. It actually dates back several years. There's been, I believe the last thing I looked at, there's been 6 of the recent mass shootings over the last 4 years have been done by people who were either identified themselves as transgender or were actively transitioning with medical hormone treatments, surgical alterations, so on and so forth.
And I don't know where you stand. You answer this, I guess. If they were just messing with people over 18,
that's their business.
It wouldn't bother me that much.
No, they asked for acceptance. We gave them acceptance.
Yep.
And now we're getting punched in the face for it, because acceptance isn't enough anymore. Acceptance didn't deliver them the high they thought it would. Acceptance didn't make them feel like they were equal to everyone else. They needed superiority in order to affirm their belief that they're not disordered. You see, that's really what it comes down to. The mentally ill are adrift, and certain illnesses require certain inputs in order to maintain. And transgenderism, gender dysphoria, needs constant affirmation or it collapses in on itself. Because guess what? The woman who's transitioning to be a man is reminded every 28 days that she's not a man.
Yeah, I heard you say that on KFAB. I love that.
And it's so he has to deal with that. And the only way they can deal with that is if they can force everyone else to behave as if it didn't happen.
Well, and Joe Herring is my guest today, and you can find his daily blogging and writing at Daily Herring, like the fish, HERRING.com. Then, when we do to them what they do us, when we mock them and we say, look how silly you are acting, and you want to change how children identify themselves, and they expect us to let them do that, my God in heaven, these are our kids. And I heard something on the radio the other day that it's like less than 1% of the people out there have anything to do with transgenderism. But it's like 30-some% in local polls that people support some of this action. And it isn't, as you said, it isn't just, okay, go ahead and do it and leave us alone. It's do it our way or you're going to die.
Exactly.
We're going to come after you.
And that's some of the signs being held by crowds of transgender supporters down in Lincoln during the LB 574 fight have been holding signs saying, if you don't give us what we want, we're going to identify as an effing problem for you. That is an implicit, explicit threat.
Why aren't those people arrested?
Because
they have
cowardice.
the right to protest?
Well, yes, they have the right to protest, but they don't have the right to threaten. And the fact that they don't get arrested, that they aren't held to the same standards that someone on the right would be held to, is because the powers, the authorities, just don't want the fight. They don't want the
They're scared.
Exactly.
Well, they're not hired to be scared. They're hired to police us and uphold our laws.
Well, when they came after the kids, that's when they, in my opinion, reached their peak.
We're gonna wrap this whole thing up on tomorrow's radio program, and it's also on YouTube as well as Facebook. And I pray you're listening. Now, I do want your input. I do want to hear if you think we're wrong or we're out of line, but don't call me homophobic or racist or a hater, because while you're pointing one finger at me and Joe and some of us speaking out, remember there are three pointing back at you. We all are in this together. And I know this is an old saying and it's probably getting old, but can't we just all get along? I want to thank the folks at Divine Truth, 84th and Harrison, for their support of this show, whether it's a wedding present, a confirmation, graduation, whatever you need, they've got it. And you can order it online at, divinetruthchristian.com. Thanks for sponsoring. We'll see you tomorrow right here.
Divine Truth Christian Store, where you'll find more.
The comments heard on The View From A Pew are those of Mac McCoy and are not necessarily the opinions of his guests, his producer Garth, any one particular denomination or religion, the church lady, Mr. Lemke, Pastor Craig, or anyone else of sound mind and body. Now, here is today's The View From A Pew, heard all around the world on YouTube. Just search for The View From A Pew.
Thank you, Emily. Welcome back to The View From A Pew here on this Friday. We appreciate you listening. I've had Joe Herring on as my guest today. He was on 1110 KFAB a few weeks ago and just did an amazingly truthful, fact-based show on what the left or a group of people or woke people or whoever you want to label them as, they're not honest and they're not fair. However, if you want a platform to come and talk about this, and you're on that side, you've got it. I will gladly open up my studios. I will gladly open up my microphones. Am not interested in getting into an argument. I am interested in how you feel, how this makes you think, and what you think of us who don't agree. Can we have that conversation? I'll give you the platform. Jesus would want it that way. He says, turn the other cheek. Well, I'll turn the other microphone and I'll turn it towards you, and you can share with us why we should not feel like you're lying, cheating, and stealing from us, and who you're stealing is our children. You're stealing kids here, and that's unacceptable. Joe, we're going to wrap up this conversation today on Friday, and I know you've got a few more things that you said in your original show that I want you to share with us. And again, it's Joe Herring, and it's dailyherring.com, and that's where you can find him. All right, go ahead.
Well, I believe that we're seeing the pinnacle now of the transgender movement. They, I believe, will find, as history records this, that this was the high point of their journey and everything will be downhill from there, because they overstepped in the extreme when they decided that our children were theirs, that they were able to and ought to take control and to change them. You know, there was a news story just the other day talking about a teacher who had played a specific Disney show that had the first LGBTQ character, whatever, in a 5th grade class. And when she was called on the carpet for it, her response was, on CNN, was, when you put your kids into public schools, you give up your parental rights.
Oh, man.
Now, this is not just the disordered...
Unbelievable.
Well, yeah, it's not just the disordered thinking, though, of a single 5th grade teacher, because this also happens across the country. This is an agenda point on the left. I write a weekly column for a website called The Lion. It's the news outlet of the Herzog Foundation, which believes in Christian education,
Yeah.
K through 12.
Yep.
And they do tremendous amount of work on it. And I've reported on several of these issues because across the country, you are seeing school boards and teachers unions asserting that we have entered into a contract giving our children to them simply because we are taking advantage of the public schools.
Well, then they shouldn't complain when, like in Iowa, the governor passed a bill that they're now going to give tax dollars to Christian schools and private schools. The teachers have no right to complain. If it goes one way, it's got to go the other way.
But it doesn't in their minds.
I know.
Because you have to understand, they are coming at this from a reestablishment standpoint. They don't believe, at base, the left does not believe that the United States was founded correctly. We were put together wrong. And consequently, that has to change. And the only way you can change it really is to burn the whole thing down and then rebuild it back the way it should have been in the first place. They don't understand that everything they're talking about has been done before.
Yeah.
And it has resulted in countless deaths.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead and finish the script that you have, and then I got a couple questions I want to ask you, please.
Well, when we gave them acceptance, which is what they asked for,
Yeah.
they asked for tolerance.
Yeah.
When we said, go ahead, live your best version of you, and we agree not to laugh and point. When we did that, and it didn't satisfy on your part, you got violent. You punched us in the face for it. Now, we lived with that. We accepted that. We realized, okay, you guys are not quite, playing with a full deck, or you wouldn't have been in this situation to begin with, so we can overlook that. But then when you started teaching our own children to punch us as well, that's when you overstepped.
Yeah.
Where you are now, the transgender movement is at the pinnacle. It's all downhill from here because we won't let it go further. We're not going to give up our kids. There was a letter signed by supposedly 115 Nebraska businesses saying that LB 574 is a bad idea, that it was terrible, it shouldn't be done, and that business was against it. Again, another media-driven narrative. Of the 115 businesses, only 30% of them were actual businesses engaged in commerce, a product or a service. All the rest of those were advocacy nonprofits or medical clinics and psychiatrist and counselor clinics who make money from transgender transitioning.
Wow.
It was absolutely horrible that people would present this, and an incurious media didn't bother to dig any deeper. They just reported, 115 Nebraska businesses are against. No, they're not. 34 Nebraska businesses.
Yeah.
And the ones we're talking about here are not major players. The only major player in there was Omaha Steaks, and they have to, simply because their board is forcing this down their throats, the same as every other woke corporate outlet.
Yeah.
So the rest of them are small bookstores and things like that. We're not being given the truth. So consequently, you have to go find it for yourself. You won't get it in the headlines. You won't get it in the first paragraphs. You've got to read to the end of the articles, and then you have to explain that to your friends, to your neighbors, to your family, so that they can recognize it. Because once you see the progression, as I mentioned the other day, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Joe, let's tell the people the truth that they don't want to hear. What's the consequences of us, me, I'll just use me, sitting on the sideline and doing nothing about this, covering my eyes, praying instead of yelling or protesting? What's going to happen to Omaha and Nebraska and our country and eventually our world because we're allowing these mentally ill people to change our children?
Choices and who gets to make them.
Okay.
I've long said there's only two kinds of people in this world. There are those like you and I who just want to be left alone.
Yeah.
And then there are those who, for the life of them, cannot keep their hands to themselves. All governments, our Constitution, everything was put together in order to protect the first group from the second.
Yeah.
And if we don't engage now, if we permit this, then what you're going to see are choices that belong to parents, how to raise your child, how to deal with this and that. Those choices will be offloaded from you to a bureaucrat, and they will, your teacher now will decide how this child should be raised. And what's her benefit in doing so? What's her bona fides? That, well, I've got an education degree. Well, we've seen what degrees are good for.
Yeah.
We saw it during the entire COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
We realized that the rule of experts is not good. It
Yeah.
doesn't turn out the right way. So if you don't engage, what you're doing is handing over all of your choices to people who won't make them in your favor.
The Daily, or it's not the, I'm sorry, Daily Herring, Herring. Joe is a professional author and writer, and maybe quickly becoming a heck of a good broadcaster, too. And I thank you for spending your time with us this week. I hope you're safe. When I do these type of shows, what they'll do. And I don't have bulletproof glass or anything like that. They want to take me out because I give people a platform to speak. What they don't understand is I'll give them the same platform.
Right.
But when they come on, we're going to tell the truth.
When you can't defend the indefensible, your only alternative is to silence the other side.
Yeah, and that won't happen. But hey, you want to come on and as a transgendered person or someone who's in favor of this, and we didn't even really get to talk about this. I identify as blank. I love the guy. What was he, in Philadelphia or something, a city councilman?
I had him on my show, actually.
Did you
on
really?
KFAB. The day after that news broke, I had him on my show. In fact, I'm going to be having him on again because he's very well spoken.
Yeah.
And he understands this, and he's actually a lot of fun.
Well, you know what? Part of me wants to do that myself. Okay, we'll fight fire with fire. I want you to know that I identify as a blankety blank, 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 and now I can compete this way, or I can get money from the government that way. Oh, I'm going to identify myself as an American Indian, a relative of the American Indians, so I can get some land, or I'm going to identify myself as an Alaskan so I can get some oil money.
Exactly.
Where does it end? It ought to end with, that's not true, sir or young lady. And I'm sorry you don't get to take advantage of other people because you want to identify yourself as whatever you want to identify yourself. I identify myself as a follower of Jesus. That's the only thing I am. And I do what Jesus tells me to do in that wonderful book called the Bible. Basic instructions before leaving earth. Bible. That's how I identify. Can you tolerate that? Can you trust that? Can you trust me to make laws for you when I identify as a follower of Jesus? Let's talk about it. You want to come on this radio program, this platform? You are welcome anytime. Just get a hold of me, Mac, at theviewfromapew.com, and you will be allowed to come on and speak the truth that you believe you're speaking. I want to thank the folks over at Divine Truth Christian Store, 84th and Harrison. It's also online at divinetruthchristian.com. You can order anything you want there. And thank them for being a locally owned business that still cares about you as a customer. I'm Mac McCoy. If I'm not here Monday at 4, well, remember, just find Jesus, because I'll be with him.
Divine Truth Christian Store, where you'll find more.